Welcome back to another video. So I had asked a question to the AQ3D players if they liked the scaling system in AQ3D, and then asked if yes, why, if no, why. We had 450 votes on the Twitter poll, with 66.4% of them saying that they don't like the scaling system. 12.9% said yes, they like it, and then 20.7% said that they don't care. On my Discord server, I also did the same poll for the people who don't have Twitter, and these are the results right here. So 9 people, I basically asked the same question, do you like the scaling system in AQ3D? So 9 people said yes, 113 people said no, and 20 people said I don't care. On YouTube, I made the exact same poll for those who don't have Twitter or don't have Discord, where I asked if they like the scaling system, and if yes, why, if no, why. And out of 775 votes, 76% said no. You had 6% that said yes, and then 18% that said I don't care. And this is actually very close to the same number that we got on Twitter. Considering those 3 polls, it's very obvious that the majority of players don't like the current scaling system. Now, the system that we have in place is actually different than what we had when scaling was first introduced. In fact, when scaling was first introduced, it was only kept in event areas, and we were fine with that. No one had a problem when it was just in the seasonal event areas. We didn't have an issue with it. What the problem was, they started introducing it into the game. Now, the overall idea why scaling was introduced in the first place was so that everybody could play together. You could have level 5s experiencing the same thing that level 30s were experiencing, and the logic behind this is understandable. It actually makes a lot of sense when you have a small community to get them all together. I can understand the logic behind that. The problem with that is it kills longevity of the game. Largely what happens is there's lack of progression. Now, they do have scaling in ESO, which is Elder Scrolls Online. There is scaling in that game, but they do it in such a way where you're still rewarded when you level up, because there is still progression beyond just a thing. You gain extra skill points you could put on your classes to make them stronger, or things like that. Perks that you unlock, which we don't get that benefit in AQ3D. In fact, you're actually punished when you level up. And the more people you have in a dungeon, you're punished because there's more people in that dungeon. So instead of fixing it, it's actually made things much worse. King Werepire and I did some tests in a scaled area because we really wanted to check out how woefully flawed scaling is. If you compare these stats, you'll see that he has much better stats than me, and this is because most of what I'm wearing is just level 40 gear, all scaled level 40 gear. I haven't farmed for any of the endgame stuff, and I'm probably not going to. We decided to face some frog zards and then see what kind of damage output we're doing with the auto attack. King Werepire was doing more damage, but not that much more, especially considering he has 1,000 more attack and crit than me. We did another test on our defense and health, keeping in mind, of course, that his stats are vastly over mine, and as you'll witness, the damage we're receiving is pretty close to being equal, with his increased health basically being the only reason why there's a difference. Also, if you check out the evasion, you'll see he has a higher evasion than mine, yet when we ran some tests on dodging, I was dodging an average between 4 to 6, and he was dodging an average between 4 to 7. I didn't record those tests, but it's sad that in a scaled area, stats really don't mean that much. The only stat that seems to actually have any form of influence at all is your health. I'm going to go over some of the feedback from the players, but before I get to that, I just want to say one thing. I read a suggestion that was brilliant. It basically said scaling, if they were going to have it in for certain things, is fine, but once you get to a certain level in certain maps, the scaling is void. For instance, at Greengard, let's say if the scaling caps out at level 10, so then anything beyond level 10 doesn't scale, meaning if you go back to Greengard as a level 30, those monsters are not scaled for you because they cap out at level 10. So let's say if you went to Heartwood and the monsters capped out at level 20, if you went to Ashfall and the monsters capped out at level 30, or so on and so forth. If they had set caps where the monsters would not exceed those things, then the people who are higher levels would be enjoying that because they can go back to these old areas and solo the places they weren't able to solo before, which is a thing I've seen constantly through all these comments. I see a lot of people saying, I can't solo this and I can't solo that. This is an MMO. It's expected that you're supposed to play with other people, but there's a lot of maps that are dead and you can't play with other people when there's nobody there. But let's check out some of the comments here on YouTube, and we'll check some of the ones on Twitter as well. And I did read through every single one, and there was great feedback on them all. I'm not going to go through everything, but I will be picking and choosing kind of some of the ones that are based on how the community feels. King Rare Pie says, to be honest, scaling system makes us feel like we aren't progressing. We should be able to go to a low level content and one-shot every enemy instead of being level 42 in a level 21 area. This actually goes back to what I was just suggesting earlier about having a cap on scaling if they insist on keeping it in. Brandon says, honestly, I feel that scaling is okay, but I don't think it's being utilized as it should be. Scaling should be more of a challenge mode with challenge mode rewards. The fact that everything scales with no reward and making assisting low-level players difficult defeats the purpose, in my opinion, which it really does. Jen says, scaling is really good in temporary events, which I agree, so that low-level players can participate, but if everything is scaled, even the story, that just sucks because we can't enjoy the high-level gear. John points out, when I do the locker dungeon with a random party, it's way worse since all the enemies are scaled up to fight 5 players. I find soloing much more easier and faster because of that. If they're going to fix scaling, at least make the enemies 2 or 3 levels below us, but keep the XP and class XP gain the same. Gabriel says he has no opinion when it comes to scaling. He likes the game so much, and thanks to the devs for this amazing MMO. Key says, I like the scaling system in PvP. It makes it at least a little more fair, not fully, but otherwise PvE and such is not really good for scaling. Patrick says, scale the special events, but leave scaling out of the storyline quests. Ark says, scaling is an excellent idea, however, it can make an already hard zone to completely impossible. I believe scaling the whole map is a terrible idea, Celadon and Atlantis, except for a map such as the Daily Boss where it's intended to be scaled. In fact, scaling has ruined recent areas, making it too long or simply too hard. Celadon Monastery. And if you've played through the monastery solo, started from scratch and played through it solo, you'll see just how impossible it is on a new account. Gorgas said scaling takes the achievement out of leveling, gaining new powerful gear and weapons, and is difficult to help lower levels if everything is scaled. Soda Thief says you're supposed to grow in power in MMOs, but scaling nullifies that. Emig says scaling is fine as long as it's just optional. The current Celadon and Atlantis suck so bad due to being forced scales in all the areas, even the overworld, which makes progression quite pointless. I'm new to AQ3D, but I'm already level 42 and I'm not continuing Celadon due to how its dungeon is laid out. You get swarmed by scaled enemies really fast, which makes spawns... Oh, and yeah, because they spawn back so fast. I get eaten like a meat slab in a piranha-infested waters in Celadon's dungeon. So much for my borderline top gear character. Nicho says scaling makes it harder, especially me as a solo player. It's just not optimized for solo players most of the time. I barely have friends, so it's difficult and embarrassing to ask a favor to someone random. Alan says it's a pain to some solo players and some seasonal players to not be able to continue story quests because of the scaling system, making other maps dead. There should be fixed levels implemented per storyline quests. Nick says the biggest failing of any game is to not have incentive to retain its player base. Even though the cosmetics keep me coming back, the scaling system is why I leave every time. Zunal says scaling should only be utilized for events and other temporary content. On Twitter, Helimon said, how many polls will it take? Maybe I've given up hope. And I said, this is the last one I plan on doing regarding scaling. I put a poll on here, Discord, and YouTube, so I hope the community votes and shares so devs will see what the majority of players want. Impure Death says, whenever you gain a level, you think you should become stronger, but in fact you become weaker, which is exactly how it is. Areas, if scaled, should have set max levels. That's where I read the thing from. So yeah, this is excellent advice, and I 100% agree. If they are going to keep scaling in the game, they need to have caps on their maps, all of their maps, except for the seasonal stuff. But yeah, areas, if scaled, should have set max levels, only allowing for lower levels to be scaled, less so for higher levels. I do not care for stats or any form of level progression anymore, and this is exactly how I feel. I haven't even done the raid. Like, as of the filming of the video, I haven't even played the raid once because I'm not really farming for the end game gear because I really don't care. There's really no reason to have better stats because it really doesn't make that big of a difference in the scaled area. Garwin said he likes how the older maps have enemies at a fixed level and dungeons can be chosen scaled or unscaled. I wish public had that option as well, though. Zantler said, I strongly believe it should be optional. In the Kickstarter, they planned on letting you pick to lower your level to help others or not. Not giving the choice really kills any fun out of new content, and it just becomes another empty grind that dies out within a week. It also gives no solo content since everything is scaled to group content. I've played since the closed beta. The game is was so much more fun before scaling was added, and that is exactly how me and all the thousands of people that have quit have said. Right here it mentions sidekick friends to your level because you would have been able to sidekick a friend to your level. So if a lower level was having trouble, you'd be able to sidekick him to you and then you could help him through a dungeon or whatever. Since then, that whole idea has been dropped, but you will also notice right here, it says solo, 2-player, large group sized adventures, like incorporating the solo, which is very important. And AQ World, as I've also mentioned in the past, is a solo. Most of it you can solo by yourself because of the classes they have in the game. Itachi says a map should definitely be locked within certain levels like we have in Green Garden, Ashfall, etc. I agree. They can make certain or specific regions or specific bosses in the same map to keep the difficulty. There we go. Nico said, I started this game because it reminds me of WoW, so I don't like scaling. I can understand that game isn't that crowded, so it's an alternative for more players to get together, but when I log in, I don't feel superior after putting hours into the game. Marak says, because of the scaling, the meaning of the maximum level disappears. For me, this is the main reason, although there are many more. There is not enough space here to express why I am against it. Matt says, I clicked yes by accident, but I wanted to click no. Oh, I see. Reason is, it doesn't make me feel like I even had any progress at all. This has been said by millions of times by millions of players. Poa said, scaling is bad, period. That's, there we go. James Cool said, I accidentally voted yes. So we have more people that accidentally voted yes. So when you see the poll up here that actually says 12%, it's probably more like 10%. In my opinion, it's a bit complex. This is not a power creep based game like other MMOs, and I like it that way, but in the other side, what's the point of grinding for equipment? Tabby says, leave the scaling for seasonal content. Simple as that. Asic says, nope, I'd get rid of all scaling everywhere and areas are set at certain levels. I remember when they first came out with scaling, Arctic said it would be for seasonal areas only, just so we could play together. So that was when they first came out with it. It was only seasonal, but then they started branching it into everywhere. Frederick says, it's fine for seasonal stuff so everyone can do it, but it's annoying everywhere else. Also makes returning to scaled areas nearly impossible if you don't have enough people. Doc says no, because there is no feeling of progression where you level up and get better gear, and I think AE underestimates how important this feeling is to the players. It also makes it more difficult to solo older areas if they are scaled, considering there aren't many people there, and that again goes back to the major problems of the scaling system is that these older areas, people come back, and I've had people time and time again come to me and say, how do you beat this dungeon or this area? Because when I go back to it, it's scaled, and there's no unscale option for some of these places. You can't do it solo, and they try to come back at a higher level because they think they're going to come back and be able to defeat it, and they can't because it's scaled. Now, I could read 100 more comments, but I'm just going to read 2 more and then I'm going to end the video. So Varial here says, it's complex. You need to have a sense of progression and not get weaker when you level or when the best equipment in your new level is not rarer than the ones you have. However, being able to play with all players regardless of level is very good and should be supported. Void here says they should do a fixed level depend on the map or the dungeon. Solo players are having a hard time on the scaled map or dungeons. The scaling system is the main reason why other players decide to quit the game. And I can tell you that is so true. I've seen so many comments of people, oh, I missed this game. Is it still scaled? Or I'll see comments where people are constantly referring to the difficulty of the game due to the scaling. And that is a huge problem. And I remember over a year ago, I mentioned this, and nothing has still been done about it. So essentially, the game is dying, and it is largely one of the main reasons is because of the scaling. Now, this will be my final video on the issue with scaling, and hopefully this is the last one that will be needed for the devs to be aware of how many people absolutely hate the scaling system. There's very few options that can be done that will satisfy the majority of players. One of those options is completely removing the scaling system from anything that isn't a side content or seasonal, and the other is completely changing it, revamping it from ground up. Like what Impure said, if they had that cap, that would be another good solution. If you guys made it this far into the video, post the secret word monkey into the comments below. I'd also like to thank everybody who voted on the polls and for posting your comments. I'm also curious, do you think something will finally happen with the scaling system? Let me know in the comments below. That is it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and keep those swords swinging.